He's in the back. Oh God, he's in the back. I can't move. I'm stuck. Someone help me. 2:02 a.m., June 12th, 2016. Latin night at Pulse Nightclub, Orlando, Florida. One of the busiest nights of the week. Over 300 patrons inside, dancing, laughter, unity. A space many called home. Omar Mateen enters. A security guard notices nothing out of the ordinary. Mateen returns hours later, heavily armed, with a semi-automatic rifle and a Glock 9mm pistol. He moves through the main bar area. Bodies fall. Music becomes confusion, shouts, panic. A survivor hides in a bathroom stall. Others crowd with her. She hears the gunman's boots pacing, the rasp of his rifle's hammers, the cold click of his pistol. She feels blood at her feet. She smells smoke, sweat, gunpowder, her heart pounding like a drum. She cannot believe this is happening. Over in another stall, someone has been shot. They whisper to one another, "Are you okay?" "I don't know." Frantic breathing. Time seems slowed. Each second stretches. Another survivor with voice shaking on the phone. "Mum, it's Pulse. There's shooting. I'm hiding in the bathroom." Listeners at 911 dispatch receive frantic calls. One man says, "We have 4 people that are deceased and we have 2 people shot. They're getting worse." Another, trapped in a bathroom, says, "We need medical assistance as soon as you can. Please." An hour later, still inside, still waiting. Someone whispers, "They're not coming." Another replies, "They will. Just don't give up." The silence that follows is heavy. Mateen speaks to negotiators outside. He claims allegiance to ISIS. He says America must stop bombing his country. He says he has explosives. He says snipers are around. But within walls inside, survivors don't hear ideology. They hear footsteps. They hear the gunman's dialogue echo into the bathroom vents. They hear nothing but fear and instinct. Survivor. Voice broken, overwhelmed. The survivor on the phone, overwhelmed. They broke through. Oh God, they're coming in. Around 5:14 a.m., SWAT breaches the building. Tear gas, flashbangs, bullets. Mateen is shot and killed after the 3-hour standoff ends. Those inside flood out into the dawn, some limping, some on stretchers, many broken. 49 people would never see the sunrise. More than 50 others would carry wounds, seen and unseen, for the rest of their lives. What began as a night of freedom, community, music, became forever changed. This is not just the story of what happened in those hours. It's the story of what it means to survive. What it means to carry memory when so many voices were silenced. In the early 2000s, Orlando was growing fast. Tourism, new business, cultural diversity. But for many in the LGBTQ+ community, there were few places where they could feel completely safe. That was when Barbara Poma, an Orlando native, opened a nightclub she called Pulse. It wasn't just a business. It was a living tribute to her brother John, who had died of AIDS years earlier. Barbara said she wanted the name Pulse because it carried his heartbeat forward. She imagined a space where people could come together, without judgment, without fear, to dance, to laugh, to live authentically. From the start, Pulse was different. It wasn't only a nightclub, it became a safe haven. It was home to drag shows, to charity fundraisers, to conversations about HIV awareness, immigrant rights, and queer youth, themed nights, karaoke, cabaret, Latin nights, built traditions. For some, it was their first taste of freedom. For others, it was family. Xiomara Rodriguez, age 24 at the time. Pulse was a loving place. Even if you walked in alone, you left with friends. You felt welcomed. It didn't matter who you were. For Orlando's LGBTQ+ community, Pulse was a promise that joy and identity could exist side by side. But Orlando, like much of America, was also a city of contrasts. It was a tourist destination, a place of sunshine and theme parks, but it was also a city with fault lines, debates about religion, politics, and LGBTQ rights. Same-sex marriage had only been legal nationwide for less than a year. Bathroom bills and anti-discrimination protections were still being fought in courts. For many queer people, especially Latinos and immigrants, Pulse wasn't just a place to dance, it was a place to breathe. Angel Colon was 26. He grew up in Orlando, close with his large Puerto Rican family. He loved dancing, going out with friends. He was proud to be openly gay, but he also carried the scars of rejection from parts of his community. On Latin night, he came to Pulse with friends, ready to celebrate. He later recalled, it was a night of dancing, of joy. And then suddenly, everything changed. Jeanette was a personal trainer and bodybuilder, known for her strength and determination. She was passionate about health, about helping others. Her friends described her as unstoppable, a person who walked into a room and lifted the energy. That night, she wanted nothing more than to enjoy herself, to feel free on the dance floor. Eddie was 30 years old, living in downtown Orlando. He worked in finance. He had a close relationship with his mother, Mina. That night, he sent her simple updates. "Mommy, I love you." As the hours passed, his texts would become a haunting record of what was unfolding inside Pulse. Patience was 20 years old, visiting from Philadelphia. She had come to Florida on vacation, tagging along with friends who insisted Pulse was the place to go. She wasn't even supposed to be in Orlando that long. She remembered the warmth of the club, the joy of the crowd. Hours later, she would find herself trapped in a bathroom stall, bleeding from gunshots, whispering prayers she thought might be her last. Stanley was 23, a pharmacy technician. Friends said he had a smile that could light up a room. He was goofy, optimistic, always cracking jokes. That night, he posted a Snapchat video from inside Pulse, showing the carefree joy of the dance floor just minutes before the gunfire began. He never made it out. Luis was 22, a student at Seminole State College and an employee at Universal Studios on the Harry Potter ride. His friends called him selfless, always willing to lend a hand. J.K. Rowling herself would later post a tribute, saying she couldn't stop crying over the loss. Luis had been out with friends, excited for Latin night. He would never see the sunrise. Mercedes was 26, the daughter of Mexican immigrants. She was the pride of her family, a hard-working young woman balancing college with helping at home. She loved music, laughter, and her close-knit group of friends. That night, she went to Pulse with her best friend, Amanda Alvear. Neither survived. Amanda was 25, a nursing student who often posted playful videos online. Minutes into the attack, she shared one final Snapchat. The music pounding, her face glowing under the club lights. In the background, faint pops of gunfire could be heard, at the time, mistaken for part of the music. It was her last message to the world. Christopher was a regular at Pulse, a man with a big heart and quick instincts. He remembered running toward the patio when the shooting began, helping carry injured friends outside. He gave away his bandana to help stop bleeding. Covered in blood, he would later tell reporters, "You just don't think. You just do what you can to save people." Eddie's story haunts in a different way. He texted his mother, Mina, from inside a bathroom. "Mommy, I love you. In club they shooting. He's coming. I'm gonna die." For nearly 30 minutes, she messaged back, pleading for him to stay calm, to hide, to wait for help. Eddie's texts stopped at 2:50 a.m. He never came home. Brenda was 49, a mother of 11, a two-time cancer survivor. She went to Pulse that night with her son, Isaiah. Witnesses say she shielded him when the gunfire started. She was killed protecting him. Isaiah survived. To understand the weight of what happened inside Pulse, we need to know who was there. These were not faceless numbers. They were sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, students, dreamers. June 11th, 2016. A Saturday. Pulse was preparing for its popular Latin night, featuring salsa, bachata, reggaeton. The floor would be packed. The bar would be busy. Regulars came every week, while newcomers stepped nervously through the doors for the first time. Among them were people celebrating birthdays, couples enjoying date nights, friends unwinding after work. At the front, bartenders welcomed guests they knew by name. On the dance floor, the DJ set the rhythm. Songs by Daddy Yankee, Mark Anthony, Ricky Martin pulsing through the speakers. It was a portrait of joy, of identity, of life lived loudly. Every person had their own story. A university student, finishing finals, finally ready to relax. A mother of two, out with her best friend for a rare night away from responsibility. A bartender who had worked at Pulse for years, pouring drinks, listening to regulars' stories becoming part of their lives. They all stepped into Pulse with one expectation, that they could be safe here. But safety is fragile. It can be shattered in seconds. And in the early hours of June 12th, the laughter and music of Pulse would collide with unimaginable violence. A space built in memory, meant to keep love alive, would soon be written into history for the worst possible reason. 2:02 a.m. First shots fired. At 2:02 a.m. on June 12, 2016, a space built for joy and freedom was invaded by unimaginable violence. What began as dancing and laughter turned in an instant into a fight for survival. Omar Mateen, armed with a SIG Sauer MCX semi-automatic rifle and a Glock 17 pistol, entered Pulse Nightclub and opened fire. Inside the club, the sound was deafening. Ray Rivera, celebrating a friend's birthday. I thought it was firecrackers. I actually smiled like, oh wow, part of the show. But then I saw people dropping. That's when the scream started. People pushed and shoved. Everyone just wanted to get out. Patience Carter, a 20-year-old visiting from Philadelphia. The music and the gunshots blended together. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Then I felt heat on my leg. I looked down and realized I was shot. Angel Colon, who had just left the dance floor. The shots were non-stop. People were falling. I was hit 3 times. My legs wouldn't move. I dropped and stayed down, hoping he would think I was dead. In those first moments, confusion reigned. The lights were flashing, the sound system still pumping. Many didn't realize it was real until it was too late. Eddie Justice, hiding in the bathroom. "Mummy, I love you!" They shooting in the club. "I'm gonna die." "He's coming." Across the club, dozens of cell phones lit up. Desperate attempts to reach family, to hear a loved one's voice one last time, or to leave behind a digital goodbye. Those who could run, ran. Some dove through back doors, others smashed windows. Outside, survivors carried wounded friends on their shoulders, their clothes soaked in blood. Christopher Hansen, survivor. There was blood everywhere. On my shoes, my hands, my shirt. I ran out holding someone else's blood and I kept thinking, is this mine? Am I shot? I didn't even know. Camera reenactment. Chaotic scenes of people climbing over each other, slipping on the wet floor, pounding on locked doors. At 2:08 a.m., the first Orlando police officers arrived. They were met by chaos. Dozens of wounded lay on the sidewalks. Survivors screamed that the shooter was still inside. And from within, bursts of automatic fire continued. Police radio chatter reenacted. Multiple victims down, multiple victims down. Shooter still active inside. We need long guns and more units now. Protocol in an active shooter situation is clear. Neutralize the threat. But Pulse was a maze of rooms, neon lights, narrow hallways, and panicked civilians. Officers couldn't tell where the shooter was. To rush blindly in meant risking crossfire, hitting the very people they were trying to save. Every decision now carried weight. Moral, legal, and tactical. Should police storm the building immediately and risk killing hostages in the crossfire? Or wait for SWAT and let more lives be lost in the meantime? Former Orlando Police Chief John Mina later recalled, "We were still hearing shots. We knew people were dying. But we had to think about the dozens still inside. If we rushed in without a plan, more people would die." By 2:15 a.m., the attack changed shape. The shooter moved into the restrooms, where dozens were hiding. Suddenly, this was not just a massacre. It was a standoff. Survivor account, trapped in the bathroom. He came in and said, "Are there any black people here?" Someone said yes. He said, "I don't have a problem with you. This is about my country." Then he started talking about America bombing his people overseas. I thought, he's not just here to kill. He wants to make a statement. Mateen claimed allegiance to ISIS in phone calls with negotiators. For survivors, this was no longer just random violence. It felt like war had come to their nightclub. Within 30 minutes, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force was alerted. Mateen had been investigated twice before for possible ties to extremism. The questions now: was this part of a larger plot? Were there accomplices? Were explosives planted inside Pulse? As SWAT assembled, the district attorney's office was consulted. If explosives were confirmed, evacuation zones had to be cleared. If negotiations failed, lethal force had to be authorized. Back inside the bathroom, texts continued. From Amanda Olvere's phone, "Trapped in bathroom. He's coming." Some played dead among bodies. Some whispered prayers. Some made peace with death in silence. They were ordinary people in an extraordinary nightmare, waiting to be rescued or executed. By 2:30 a.m., the nature of the crisis had shifted. The gunfire slowed. The music stopped. For the first time, the silence was louder than the bullets. Inside, dozens of hostages remained trapped in restrooms and storage rooms, their bodies pressed against tile floors, their phones vibrating in the dark. The killer had stopped hunting. Now he was talking. Police negotiators dial into Mateen's phone. He answers. His voice is steady, almost rehearsed. "Omar Mateen, from FBI transcripts. My name is Omar Mateen. I'm in Orlando, and I did the shootings. I pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of the Islamic State." For law enforcement, this was a chilling revelation. Mateen wasn't making demands for money or escape. He was declaring allegiance to a terrorist organization. Every word he spoke raised new questions. Was this just one man? Were there accomplices waiting elsewhere in Orlando? Was this nightclub only the beginning? In the bathrooms, survivors overheard Mateen speaking on the phone. Some would later recall that he seemed calm, even conversational. Patience Carter, survivor. He was on the phone, saying America needed to stop bombing his country. I remember thinking, his country. He was born here. He's American. None of it made sense. The hostages held their breath. Every word could mean life or death. Some prayed he would keep talking, because talking meant not shooting. Outside, the standoff created its own battlefield. Orlando SWAT had mobilized. Snipers took positions. Tactical medics waited for the order to move. But storming the building carried catastrophic risks. Mateen claimed he had explosives. If true, a single trigger could collapse the club and kill everyone inside. Former police chief John Mina We were in constant contact with the FBI, with Homeland Security. We needed to know, was this really ISIS? Were there other targets? But we couldn't wait forever. Every minute, people inside were bleeding out. At the Orange County District Attorney's office, phones rang through the night. Prosecutors were briefed in real time. This wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about the chain of command, legal justification for force, and the precedent of how America responds to terror on its own soil. ADA memo, later unsealed, noted, "Shooter has made terrorist statements. Possible coordination with foreign group. Expect federal jurisdiction." But federal jurisdiction meant delays. And in Pulse, time was running out. Text message, 2:42 a.m., from Eddie Justice to his mother. "He's in bathroom with us. He has us hostage." Justice's messages painted a minute-by-minute picture for the outside world. Police studied them in real time, mapping where Mateen was, how many were with him, and how much longer they had before the bullets started again. "Angel Colon," a survivor said. "I remember lying there, hearing people whisper prayers. I felt bodies next to me go still. I just kept telling myself, stay quiet, stay still, don't move." While negotiators kept Mateen on the line, FBI analysts scrambled. His name was not new to them. Mateen had been investigated in 2013 and 2014 for possible extremist ties. Both times, the cases were closed. But now, his words confirmed their worst fears. Had they missed warning signs? Had the system failed? An FBI agent, later testimony. "He was on our radar, we interviewed him. He didn't cross the line at the time, but in hindsight, the signs were there." That revelation would become a national scandal. For the survivors trapped inside, though, it was just background noise to the sound of footsteps, of a gunman pacing the restroom, reloading his rifle. By 3 a.m., calls were bouncing between local police, state officials, and Washington, D.C. Was this a terrorist attack requiring federal command, or a local crime scene under Orlando police control? Every jurisdiction wanted answers. Every minute of indecision meant more hostages bleeding out on bathroom floors. Survivor account. We could hear people gasping. Some were begging for water. Some were dying right next to me. We didn't know why it was taking so long for police to come in. In the chaos, one man who had escaped Pulse was rushed to Orlando Regional Medical Center. He told officers he had seen 2 gunmen inside. SWAT scrambled, thinking this was a coordinated assault. But hours later, the man changed his account, saying he wasn't sure what he saw. That single contradiction delayed tactical entry, because the fear of multiple shooters meant police had to search for ghosts before they could move. The pressure mounted. Outside, families gathered behind barricades, desperate for news. Inside, the wounded grew weaker by the minute. SWAT prepared explosive charges. Negotiators tried to stall. Prosecutors waited for legal clearance. Every player in the chain of command knew. The next decision would decide who lived and who died. For nearly 3 hours, the city of Orlando held its breath, and inside Pulse, time was running out. By 4:30 a.m., the standoff had stretched on for more than 2 hours. Dozens were still trapped in bathrooms, some alive, some bleeding out. Omar Mateen had spoken to negotiators multiple times, pledging allegiance to ISIS, claiming he had explosives, and warning of more attacks. Time was no longer on anyone's side. At 4:21 a.m., Mateen fired again inside the bathrooms. Survivors screamed into their phones. Police radios lit up with panic. SWAT commander, "We're hearing shots. Hostages are still inside. We can't wait any longer." The decision was made. Pulse would be breached. The objective was simple: end the threat, rescue whoever was still alive. But the risks were enormous. If Mateen's claim of explosives was true, one wrong move could collapse the building and kill everyone inside. Pulse was built as a fortress of concrete and steel. SWAT's first attempt was to use controlled explosives on an outer wall. Twice they detonated charges. Twice the wall held. The nightclub resisted their entry, just as the gunmen resisted surrender. Bodycam reenactment. Blasts rocking the air, smoke rising, officers coughing. Survivor, later testimony. We heard this loud boom. Dust everywhere. We thought it was him blowing us up. People started crying, thinking this was the end. With explosives failing, SWAT turned to brute force. They brought in a Bearcat armoured vehicle, its steel frame designed to withstand war zones. Inch by inch, it pushed against the walls of Pulse, tearing through concrete and rebar, carving out an escape route for hostages. Inside the bathroom, survivors described the noise. It was like the world was ending. Walls shaking, dust in our lungs. Some thought it was him shooting again. Then we saw light, daylight, a hole in the wall. One by one, survivors began crawling through the breach. Bloodied, limping, some carried by officers. SWAT pulled them out under cover of gunfire. Patience Carter, survivor. We started crawling through the hole. I didn't think I was going to make it. Then these arms just grabbed me and pulled me out. That's when I knew I was alive. But Mateen was not finished. As hostages escaped, he opened fire again, forcing SWAT to make a final decision, neutralize the shooter. At 5:02 a.m., the order was given. Officers entered through the breach. Inside, the bathrooms were filled with smoke, dust, and bodies. Mateen emerged from cover, firing his rifle. In the final exchange, he was shot dead by police. Police radio, reenactment. Suspect down, suspect down. Secure the scene. Start pulling victims now. The massacre was over. In 3 hours, Omar Mateen had killed 49 people and injured more than 50 others. The deadliest mass shooting in modern American history at the time had come to its brutal end. Outside, ambulances lined the street. Medics rushed to treat survivors, some clinging to life, others already gone. Families behind barricades waited for word. Some were reunited with their loved ones. Others would receive the call they feared most. Angel Colon, survivor. I remember being carried out. The pain was unbearable, but all I kept thinking was, I'm alive. I made it out. Christopher Hansen, survivor. I saw them dragging people, putting tourniquets on legs, chest compressions. It looked like a battlefield. It didn't feel real. The scene was immediately treated as both a crime scene and a battlefield. FBI took control of the investigation. Ballistics teams began counting hundreds of shell casings. Prosecutors prepared terrorism charges. Had the gunman survived, every piece of evidence would become part of a legal mosaic. How one man turned a sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. Analyst, reenactment of DOJ briefing. We recovered hundreds of rounds fired. He was heavily armed. He had trained. And he knew exactly what he wanted to do. For those who crawled through the breach, survival came with its own burden. Guilt for those left behind. Trauma replayed in every sound, every dream. Their ordinary lives had been shattered, replaced by memories of blood, screams, and unanswered phones. Patience Carter, hospital press conference. I'm grateful to be alive, but I lost so many friends. It's hard to understand why I'm here, and they're not. The wall of Pulse was torn open to save lives. But no wall could contain the grief, the anger, and the questions that would follow. The killer was dead. But the story of what happened inside Pulse was only beginning. As dawn broke on June 12, 2016, Orlando awoke to a nightmare. 49 lives extinguished, more than 50 wounded, hundreds more forever scarred. The gunman was dead, but the echoes of his violence reverberated through the city, across the nation, and around the world. The massacre at Pulse Nightclub was not just a crime scene. It was a shattering of sanctuary, a breach of trust, and the beginning of questions that would haunt families, investigators, and communities for years to come. In the first hours after the shooting ended, the nightclub became the largest active crime scene in Florida's history. Inside, FBI forensic teams moved carefully among the bodies. Officers tagged shell casings, weapons, and cell phones scattered across the dance floor. The air smelled of gunpowder and smoke, mixed with spilled liquor and blood. It was a scene of almost unimaginable carnage. But outside, another scene unfolded. Families gathered at the Orlando Regional Medical Center and at designated reunification centers, clutching photos, scrolling through text messages that had stopped mid-sentence. Parents called hospitals frantically. Friends drove from across the state, desperate for news. Audio clip from a parent at the reunification center. "I've been calling him since 2 a.m. The phone rings, but no one answers. Please, someone, please tell me where my son is." By morning, investigators released the gunman's name, Omar Mir Sadiq Mateen. To the world, he was a stranger. To his victims, he was the faceless terror they had tried to flee. To investigators, he was suddenly the most scrutinized man in America. Mateen was 29 years old, born in New York to Afghan immigrants, raised in Port St. Lucie, Florida. He had been married twice, worked as a security guard, and lived a quiet suburban life with a wife and young child. But beneath that veneer was a man boiling with rage, contradictions, and a desire for destruction. To investigators, one detail was alarming. The FBI had already looked at Mateen, not once, but twice. In 2013, after co-workers reported that he had praised terrorist organizations and made disturbing remarks about violence. And in 2014, after he was linked to Mona Mohammed Abu Salha, an American who became a suicide bomber in Syria. Each time, the cases were closed. No charges, no surveillance. His file marked insufficient evidence. According to a former FBI agent, "We interviewed him multiple times. We checked his travel records. We monitored his contacts. But he slipped through. He was careful. He knew what not to say." The failures would become one of the most painful debates after the massacre. How could a man flagged twice by federal authorities still walk into a gun store and legally buy the weapons that would kill dozens? In the hours of gunfire and hostage standoff, Mateen himself provided a glimpse into his motives. He called 911, pledging allegiance to ISIS. He spoke to police negotiators, claiming he had bombs. But investigators later found no direct link to any terror cell. Mateen was not a trained operative. He was not dispatched. He was self-radicalized, fed by a toxic diet of online propaganda, personal hatred, and unresolved identity. According to a counterterrorism analyst, he was the embodiment of what we fear most, the lone actor. No one guiding him, no one else to intercept. Just a man, his hate, and his weapons. Later, investigators would uncover layers of complexity. Some acquaintances said Mateen had expressed admiration for Al-Qaeda. Others said he praised Hezbollah, a rival group. He contradicted himself often. Some survivors reported that he seemed to target gay men specifically, while others recalled him mentioning foreign conflicts. His motives were a storm of ideology and personal grievance, impossible to pin down with certainty, but devastatingly effective in execution. For those who made it out alive, the hours after the massacre were filled with shock, grief, and guilt. 1. Angel Colon. I had been shot multiple times in my leg and hip. I couldn't move. I lay there, surrounded by bodies. I heard him reloading. I thought, this is it. When the police carried me out, I still thought I would die. My body hurt, but the sound of my friends' voices fading. That's what broke me. 2. Patience. Carter. We were in the bathroom, whispering prayers, holding hands. Some people said goodbye out loud. I kept thinking, I'm not ready. When I made it out, I felt guilty. Why me? Why am I alive when others aren't? That guilt is heavier than the memories. 3. Christopher Hansen. I ran barefoot, covered in blood that wasn't mine. I remember pressing my hands against someone's wound, trying to stop the bleeding. I remember the sound of gunshots behind us, the echo that still plays in my head. It doesn't stop. It never stops. These voices carried the weight of truth. They were living testimony to a night when survival was both a blessing and a burden. While survivors faced their new reality, families of the victims faced the unbearable, the confirmation that their loved ones were gone. Eddie Justice, 30, texted his mother from inside, "Mommy, I love you. I think I'm going to die." His texts were the last words she ever heard from him. Luis Vilma, 22, a Universal Studios worker, beloved for his kindness. His co-workers described him as the heart of the room. Amanda Alver, 25, had been Snapchatting from the dance floor before the shooting began. Her final video, her smile lit by neon lights, became a haunting memory. Stanley Almodovar, 23, a pharmacy technician, described as a man who could make anyone laugh. He was among the first victims identified that morning. Each name became a story. Each story, a life interrupted. Parents flew from Puerto Rico. Siblings drove through the night. Friends huddled outside the club, desperate for answers. The grief was not confined to Orlando. It spread across the world. By noon, the massacre was international news. In Washington, the president was briefed. In New York, vigils began before the names were even released. Across the globe, monuments lit up in rainbow colours. Paris, London, Sydney. The world grieved with Orlando. In former President Obama's national address, "This was an act of terror and an act of hate. We grieve with the families of the victims. We stand with the people of Orlando who have endured a terrible attack." Flags were lowered to half-staff. Candles flickered in parks and plazas. And in Orlando, strangers embraced, united by a pain too heavy for one community to carry alone. But even as the world mourned, questions began to surface. Could this have been stopped? Should the FBI have done more? Should gun laws have prevented Mateen from obtaining his weapons? Was this an act of terrorism, an act of hate, or both? The answers were complicated. The pain was simple. In the end, the shooter was gone, but the devastation he left behind would ripple for decades. The truth, piece by piece, revealed itself. And what it revealed was not only a massacre, but a mirror, reflecting America's deepest wounds. In the days after Pulse, grief turned into action. Families buried their children. Survivors endured surgeries and funerals back to back. And a city, and a nation, demanded answers. But answers were elusive. Instead, what came was struggle, in courtrooms, in hospitals, in the halls of government. The tragedy of Pulse was not finished. It was only beginning its long shadow. The first funerals began within days. In Puerto Rico, processions wound through small towns as coffins draped in flags were carried through the streets. In Orlando, churches overflowed. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder with families, holding flowers, holding silence. Eddie Justice's funeral, his mother reading the final text aloud, her voice breaking. Luis Vielma's service, attended by co-workers from Universal Studios, each wearing his favorite Harry Potter tie. Brenda Lee Marquez McCool, 49, mother of 11, remembered by her children as the strongest woman we ever knew. But mourning soon collided with conflict. Some families were split by faith and identity. Some parents refused to acknowledge their child's sexuality, even in death. For others, the funerals became protests against hate, against violence, against silence. In the months that followed, the courts became an extension of the tragedy. Survivors and victims' families filed lawsuits against the gunman's employer, against the gun store that sold him his weapons, and even against the city of Orlando. 1. The lawsuit against G4S. Mateen had been employed as an armed security guard for G4S, one of the largest security companies in the world. Plaintiffs argued that the company ignored red flags, his erratic behavior, violent threats, and disturbing comments. Attorneys claimed that allowing him to keep a gun license was negligence. According to the attorney, he was a ticking time bomb, and his employer handed him the matches. 2. The gun store debate. The lawsuits extended to the store where Mateen purchased his weapons. The argument: should background checks or red flags have stopped him? The store denied liability, saying the sale was legal under Florida law. Victims' families argued the law itself had failed. In court filings, the debate was clear. Was this massacre the failure of one man or the failure of a system? No courtroom battle drew more attention than that of Noor Salman, Mateen's widow. Arrested weeks after the massacre, she was charged with aiding and abetting her husband, accused of knowing his plans and doing nothing. Prosecutors argued she lied to the FBI, that she had foreknowledge of the attack. Her defense argued she was abused, isolated, and manipulated. A victim herself. We wanted justice. We wanted someone held accountable. But was she guilty, or just another casualty of his control? After weeks of testimony, the jury acquitted her. For some, it was vindication. For others, it was a second wound, a feeling that justice had slipped away once more. Beyond the courtrooms, survivors waged quieter battles, for recognition, for support, for healing. Medical bills soared into the hundreds of thousands. Many survivors were uninsured. The One Orlando Fund raised more than $29 million, distributed to victims' families and survivors. But disputes erupted. Who qualified as a victim? How much was a life worth in dollars? Survivors testified at city council meetings, demanding mental health services, permanent memorials, and acknowledgement. Patience Carter in a press conference. We're not just victims of June 12th. We're survivors of every day since, and we need help to keep surviving. The massacre ignited fierce political battles. For some, Pulse was proof of the need for stricter gun laws, bans on assault weapons, stronger background checks, restrictions on high-capacity magazines. For others, it was evidence of terrorism, of failures in immigration and counter-terrorism policy. In the chambers of power, Pulse became a symbol wielded by all sides. But for the families of the dead, it was never about politics. It was about the empty chairs at dinner tables, the birthdays that would never be celebrated, the voices silenced forever. As the lawsuits dragged on and the political debates grew louder, another question emerged. How would Pulse be remembered? Should the nightclub be demolished, preserved, transformed into a memorial? Some argued the site should remain untouched, a scar that spoke for itself. Others pushed for a national memorial, a place where future generations could learn the story. In 2021, Pulse was designated a national memorial by Congress, but debates continued over design, funding, and ownership. The very ground where lives were lost became contested soil, a place where grief, pride, and politics all collided. For some survivors, telling their story became a mission. They appeared at vigils, in documentaries, on talk shows. They testified before Congress. They carried the memory of the 49 with them, determined never to let the world forget. Angel Colon, learning to walk again after multiple surgeries, became a voice for gun violence prevention. Brandon Wolfe, who lost 2 best friends at Pulse, later became a national advocate, speaking directly to lawmakers. Barbara Pomer, co-founder of Pulse and mother of a gay son, dedicated herself to turning the club into a place of remembrance and healing. Brandon Wolfe in a speech, "We owe it to the 49 to build a future where no one else has to run, barefoot, through a hail of bullets. Where no mother has to get that text from her son. Where love is not met with hate." Justice after Pulse was never simple. Courtrooms offered rulings but not healing. Politicians offered promises but not certainty. The survivors fought for recognition but carried their scars alone. In the trial of memory and justice, there were victories, but no true closure. Because no verdict, no law, no memorial could ever return what was lost. The sun had barely risen over Orlando when the true scope of the tragedy was finally understood. 49 lives extinguished, more than 50 wounded, hundreds traumatized, families shattered, an entire community left in shock. But in the aftermath of the Pulse massacre, something powerful began to stir. Grief, yes, but also resolve. Out of the darkness, survivors, families, and advocates carried forward a legacy of remembrance, activism, and change. This act isn't about the gunfire or the terror. It's about what happened after the echoes of bullets stopped. The years of mourning, rebuilding, and fighting to ensure that the world would never forget Pulse. In the days that followed June 12, 2016, vigils erupted across the country. In Orlando, thousands gathered near Lake Eola Park, holding candles, crying together, wrapping arms around strangers who suddenly felt like family. Photographs of the victims were displayed on screens, their names read aloud one by one, each life honored with applause through tears. The phrase "Orlando Strong" spread across social media, printed on banners, t-shirts, and murals. Rainbow flags flew half-mast. Cities around the world lit their landmarks in rainbow colors, from the Eiffel Tower in Paris to the One World Trade Center in New York. The global LGBTQ+ community had been attacked, but the global response was unified. You will not erase us. For the parents, siblings, partners, and children of the victims, grief did not fade with headlines. It remained raw and unrelenting. Christine Leinonen, mother of victim Christopher Drew Leinonen, became a voice for change almost immediately. Standing outside the nightclub the day after the attack, she pleaded on national television, "Why do our children always have to die? Why do we keep allowing this to happen?" Her anguish became symbolic of the thousands of families shattered by gun violence. Survivors, too, became unwilling advocates. Brandon Wolfe, who lost his best friends Drew and Juan, admitted he struggled with survivors' guilt. For months, he couldn't sleep through the night, haunted by the sound of gunfire. But eventually, he decided his pain had to mean something. He dedicated his life to activism, becoming a national figure in the fight against gun violence. Pulse reignited America's ongoing debate about guns. The shooter had legally purchased a Sig Sauer MCX semi-automatic rifle and a Glock 17 pistol just days before the attack, despite being on the FBI's radar in 2013 and 2014 for possible extremist ties. To many, this was unthinkable. In the weeks after the massacre, Democratic lawmakers staged a dramatic sit-in on the House floor demanding gun reform. Survivors traveled to Washington, D.C., meeting with senators, testifying in hearings, telling their stories again and again in hopes that their suffering would spark change. Though no sweeping gun legislation immediately passed, Pulse became part of a chain of tragedies, Sandy Hook, Las Vegas, Parkland, Uvalde, that fueled a growing national movement. Survivors of these massacres often connected, marching together, amplifying one another's voices. Beyond gun control, the attack raised urgent questions about the safety of LGBTQ+ spaces. Pulse had been more than a nightclub. It was a sanctuary. For many, it was the first place they had ever felt safe to hold hands, dance freely, kiss without fear. That it became a slaughterhouse shook the community to its core. Advocates pushed harder for anti-discrimination protections, hate crime legislation, and better mental health resources for LGBTQ+ youth. Pride events in the following years were marked by heightened security, but also by renewed defiance. Rainbow flags waved higher, the message louder: we will not be silenced. In the years after the attack, the site of the nightclub became sacred ground. The One Pulse Foundation was established to honor the victims, support survivors, and preserve the memory of that night. Plans were set in motion for a permanent memorial and museum. The temporary memorial outside the club, covered in flowers, notes, teddy bears, and photographs, became a pilgrimage site for mourners from across the world. Each anniversary, families and survivors gather to read the names again, to remember the laughter, the dreams, the humanity of those lost. These ceremonies are not just rituals of grief, but acts of resistance, reminders that these lives mattered and will continue to matter. Pulse was not only a mass shooting, it was a cultural and political turning point. It was at once an act of terrorism, a hate crime, and a product of America's gun crisis. It forced the nation to confront how these issues intersect. Politicians debated whether it was primarily an act of ISIS-inspired terror or homophobic violence. For the LGBTQ+ community, the distinction hardly mattered. The victims were targeted in their space, their sanctuary. For them, Pulse became a symbol of both vulnerability and resilience. Documentaries, books, plays, and films followed, capturing the voices of survivors and families. Each retelling ensured that the victims would not be reduced to numbers, but remembered as people. Eddie Justice, who texted his mother Mina during the shooting, became a haunting symbol of the attack. Mina later dedicated her life to honoring his memory by speaking about the importance of love, acceptance, and vigilance. Amanda Alvear, a 25-year-old nursing student, had posted a Snapchat video of herself dancing moments before the shooting began. Her story reminded people of the vibrancy and joy stolen that night. Stanley Almodovar III, a pharmacy technician, was remembered by co-workers and friends as someone who always carried hope and humor. His mother now speaks about his life at events to ensure he's remembered as more than a victim. Each name, each story, added to the weight of the legacy. The years since Pulse have been defined by survivors' refusal to let the world forget. Brandon Wolfe became press secretary for Equality Florida and later joined national organizations like Everytown for Gun Safety. Barbara Poma, the owner of Pulse, dedicated herself to the One Pulse Foundation. Families of the victims found community with one another, supporting each other through unbearable anniversaries and legal battles. The world changed too. Hate crime awareness increased. Discussions about gun laws grew louder. LGBTQ+ representation in politics and media expanded. And yet, each new mass shooting reopens the wounds, leaving survivors asking, when will it end? Pulse was more than a nightclub. It was a community. It was a home. On June 12, 2016, that home was shattered, but the voices of those inside continue to echo. In their memory, a movement rose. Their laughter, their dreams, their love lives on through the people who carry their names, their stories, their legacy. They remind us that even in the face of unspeakable hate, love and resilience will always endure. 49 lives were stolen, but 49 legacies now light the path forward.